Basically, the term retroactive jealousy refers to unwanted intrusive thoughts, often obsessive curiosity, and or what I like to call mental movies about your partner's past relationships and or sexual slash dating history. So, sometimes people compare it to obsessive compulsive disorder. At the very least, many experiences of retroactive jealousy has a lot in common with a lot of experiences of OCD. But basically, it's people who can't stop thinking about their partner's past, at least some of the time. Sometimes it's related to what I call genuine clashes in values. In other words, sometimes, someone's past could indicate that there are some genuine red flags there. There could be some genuine incompatibilities. But more frequently, at least with the people that I work with one-on-one, it's more or less irrational. There's no serious concern about your partner's values. There's no serious red flags. It's more or less this extremely torturous, painful, annoying condition where you can't stop thinking about your partner's past, picturing them in bed with past lovers, wondering about exactly what they did and where they went with their past lovers, all this kind of thing. For people who have never experienced it, it might sound quite odd, but there are hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of us, if the traffic to my website is any indication. So it's more popular, it's more common, shall we say, than you might imagine. And I got into this bizarre line of work. I struggled with this myself in my personal life when I was a much younger man. And, this is well over 10 years ago. And the internet at that time, there was basically nothing on this topic. I own the domain retroactivejealousy.com, not because I'm some millionaire, but because I registered it a million years ago because no one else had it. It was really not much information at all. I struggled with this for years in my first serious relationship. It was absolute hell. I did everything I could to try to work my way through it. I went to seminars, I read endless books, I talked to therapists, I had all kinds of different experiences. And when I finally made a progress on that, I published a very short book under a pen name because I didn't think this was going to become my life. I just kind of wanted to put something out on this topic. The book is called Overcoming Retroactive Jealousy, and that was back in 2013. I launched the blog at the same time. And yeah, I have other projects as well, but this has been a constant in my life for over 10 years, is helping people work through this issue.
So I would say you were far from imagining that a bit more than 10 years ago, you would become the retroactive jealousy guy on the internet. Like, I think it was nowhere in your head.
No.
I think you were trying to find a way to solve your own problems, and then you thought you could help others. How do you see, like, after 10 years that you got into this role?
Yeah, well, in some ways, I think it makes sense, when I look back on it, because I think I mentioned I'm at my parents' house right now, my childhood home. And I remember growing up just being surrounded by books on psychology, self-help, personal development. So when I really think about it, I've always had an interest. I've always been surrounded by people who are interested in bettering themselves and self-help and psychology and all the rest. My mother was a social worker, so obviously she would read a lot of psychology. But actually in university, I studied for 7 years. I have 2 master's degrees in history, basically. My plan was to become a history professor. But at the same time, I got very interested. This is back when I was in university. I was very interested in men's work. I was in a men's group for a while. And I would kind of found myself, counseling friends, going through difficult relationships and things like that. I'd always been very interested in that. I always felt moved to help people in one way or another. So in some ways, it's strange looking back and thinking that I ended up as the retroactive jealousy guy. But at the same time, it kind of makes sense if you look at my entire history dating back to my childhood.
Yeah. Well, I think at this point, for the people that are listening to it, there's already at least a handful of them thinking, maybe I'm one of them. I never thought about it, but I can relate to this problem, because it's not something that, let's say, you would realize right away, but it might ring a bell. So I know you have a whole course at the program available for people, which is extremely helpful. You have plenty of testimonials of individuals saying, men and women both, saying they changed their lives radically after going through that. But if you don't mind, just tell, like, in a nutshell, what people can do about it. I know you have videos about it. You just tell, like, 3-5 steps that are major, like in terms of actions, ideas.
Sure. Sure, yeah, and just to be absolutely clear, I mean, if you go to my YouTube channel, there's literally hundreds of free videos. So if you don't want to, support my work financially, that's totally fine. There's all kinds of stuff available. But in terms of actionable steps, I think, I mean, God, where to begin? Number one, I think one of the most important skills that anyone can learn who's dealing with retroactive jealousy is to separate your emotional response to the thought from the thought itself. Realize that when you have an intrusive thought, or when you have a thought that causes any sort of emotional response in you, there's actually two processes going on. We almost imagine it as being one and the same, where we get a painful thought and the thought is painful, and it's almost like a package, but it's not. There's the thought that pops into our head, and then there's our reaction to the thought. As I often say, we can't always do a lot about the thought popping into our head, but we can do a lot about learning to manage and control our emotional response to the thought. And this is where the gold is. This is where the miracles truly start to happen. Because once we start getting a handle on managing our emotional response to the thought, if we build up that habit over and over and over again of managing our emotional response to the thought, eventually our brain's going to get the hint that, you know what, we don't need to be thinking about this all the time. Our fight or flight impulse isn't necessary. There's no serious problem here. And eventually those thoughts will start to fade. That begs the question, how on earth do we manage our emotional response to the thought? And I think that a lot of it can start with the breath, learning how to manage our breath and learning how to gauge and manage our physical response to these thoughts. Because as you know, as we all know, body and mind are connected, right? Mm-hmm. We often want to tackle mental problems all in our head, but if we start getting into our body more and learning to manage our physical response to thoughts, that can impact our mentality as well. So as I say, it starts with the breath. So you get an intrusive thought, starts causing all these emotional responses in us. Number one, ask yourself, am I breathing right now? Because 99 times out of 100, when someone's going through one of these episodes, they might not be conscious of it, but their breath starts to get very, very shallow. They're not breathing really deeply into their lungs. It's almost up around their sternum, very short and shallow. And when we do this, it compounds everything. It sends a panic response to our brain. So that's going to feed the intrusive thought even more. It's going to feed panic. It's going to cause our fight or flight instinct to kick in. So if we can learn in those moments just to take a few deep breaths, it's the oldest advice in the world, right? Everyone gives us, oh, just take a few deep breaths and relax. But it's a cliche, it's cliched advice for a reason. It really does help. It really does work. So number one, make sure you're breathing. Number two, you can ask yourself, what's my body doing right now? So one of the ways you can do this is you can almost pretend like you're outside of yourself looking at yourself. So most people, when they're going through an experience of retroactive jealousy or intrusive thoughts, there's some kind of tension on their body. So for me, my shoulders used to get kind of tense, and I would almost be squinting a little bit. It took me a while to realize this, but this part of my face would almost get a little bit tight. So again, we're interested in breaking patterns. Just take a minute to shift your physicality a little bit. It sounds silly. It sounds like, well, I'm dealing with this thing, this problem with my partner's past. Why is he talking about, moving your body and breathing and all this stuff? It's because these are very easy, simple, practical, non-intellectual ways to start to change some of these patterns that have often built up in our body over many, many years. So that's two things to start doing. I mean, I could talk about a lot more. We could talk about meditation practices. We could talk about mindfulness practices. And also, depending on someone's experience of retroactive jealousy, I think it's very useful to start getting a handle on how much of this problem is truly irrational versus how much of this problem is actually rational. And that's where talking to a good therapist or a coach or someone like me, that can be very useful in talking through your feelings and trying to get a better handle on whether there's actually a problem with your partner's past or whether it's simply that you can't stop thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that some of the advice you gave, it's physical, and it's not what people would expect. And I truly believe that we can solve some of our mental issues or psychological drama just by taking action, just by doing something, just by being active, just by accomplishing something domestic. I think it was you. One of your videos, you were saying, well, if there's nothing useful to do, just do the dishes, and you'll feel much better afterwards. There is this reward, and the reward is full of positive emotion, and at least for, let's say, half an hour, 1 hour, your life will be much better, and you probably will forget about all those mental movies. So it seems that the physical stuff is crucial, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, so back in 2014, I started a secret Facebook group for students who take my online course, Get Over Your Partner's Past Fast. And people come and go, depending on, some people just want to move on from this topic completely. I completely understand that. But I mean, I think right now we're pushing 600 people, and like a lot of people have been in there for many years. It's great. But anyway, sorry, this is composed exclusively of either past or current retroactive jealousy sufferers. And at least, once a month, someone will start talking about exercise, and oh my God, like, I just started this simple exercise routine based on Zach's, advice, and this has made such a difference in my overall life. And again, it's not original advice. It's not groundbreaking advice. We all know that physical exercise is good, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I think people often underappreciate how impactful it can be to make changes to our body or to do something physical or whatever when we're dealing with mental problems. So you're absolutely right. It's so important.
Yeah, I actually had a guest here who is a personal trainer. I mean, he owns his own gym company or fitness company. They don't have gyms. They just look after a few gyms for clients. And he said one sentence. I think it's not his. I think it's an Irish sentence. I don't know, or some English speaking sentence. They say, I don't want to get it wrong. I think it was motion is lotion, and that's absolutely true.
Yeah,
absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Motion
See, I have a dirty mind, so my mind goes somewhere different. But no, it's good. I like it. Yeah. It's good. It's good. I like it.
Well, it can be motion with someone. It doesn't need to be
exactly.
on your own.
Shared motion, absolutely.
Shared motion. Yeah.